Welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, my guest is the great Volcano Blonde Stacy Herbert, TV presenter with the newly established Bitcoin office in El Salvador. Stacy, how are you?
Doing quite well here near the equator, closer to the equator than, up north where everybody's freezing this Christmas.
Before the call started, you said that your home state is having like the coldest winter in recorded history.
Yeah, right now, this December, these next few days. So I'm happy not to be there. It's hard to feel any sort of empathy for them when I'm sitting in the sun.
I've seen you actually tweeting a lot about how El Salvador is Bitcoin paradise. So that's nice. How do you view El Salvador's Bitcoin law a year later?
It's been a remarkable achievement in a very short time. So I've been in Bitcoin since 2011, and it seems like a very long time. It feels like a very long time, and it was a very slow process to orange pill people and to spread adoption. So when I see the extraordinary success just in 2022 alone, to me, it's just mind-blowing. Of course, there's the mainstream legacy fiat financial press, which somehow manages to, not successfully, I think, but they try to paint it as some sort of failure, when in fact, it's been an extraordinary success in both time and scale. So recently in CoinDesk's top 10 achievements for Bitcoin in 2022, for example, they have a catalog of achievements from President Bukele regarding Bitcoin in El Salvador. And just look at that list. It's extraordinary. And, it includes the things like the securities law, which was just introduced, the first ever Bitcoin embassy, which is in Lugano, the third most important financial center in the most important financial country in the world in terms of the legacy financial system. We have a Bitcoin office. There's been a huge number of successes, including the Bitcoin tourism. Of course, many people come here for a Bitcoin paradise.
Yeah. When I spoke to the finance minister while I was there in El Salvador for the conference, he was talking about how tourism has almost doubled. It's like 40% more than it was the year before. We've heard about the benefits of Bitcoin in El Salvador, but what challenges would you say El Salvador is facing in implementing a Bitcoin standard like nationally?
For me, until President Bukele did this, even on our show, the Kaiser Report in 2014 or 2015, Max Kaiser and Tur Demeester had kind of predicted that there would obviously be a First Nation to adopt Bitcoin. The closest they came to El Salvador was Panama, because they said it would be a small country with economic liberty as their policy. Of course, President Bukele has stated that economic liberty is his policy. So it's natural that he would then come to Bitcoin from that. For me, up until it had been hypothetical until President Bukele did it. And what I see as achievements are different from what I see for an individual or a company. Remember when Michael Saylor was the first to put Bitcoin on a corporate treasury. And that was a different era from the individual and what the individual, their journey to Bitcoin is, and then what a corporation had a different journey. And now El Salvador as a nation has a different story. So the thing about it, in terms of how some might look at what the metrics for achievement are in terms of adoption, I think are kind of wrong, because they look at merchant adoption, which I think is a legacy financial system metric to really look at, right? Look at the rebrand that has happened here in El Salvador. This is a tiny country in a huge world. 6 million people, tiny little country in Central America. And look at the vast asymmetric power that Bitcoin has given them. Look at the fact that everyone in the world knows their name now. Everybody knows their name for good reasons. They know the name of El Salvador because of President Bukele and because of Bitcoin, right? They don't ever think now of the gangs or the highest homicide rate in the world, which is now one of the lowest in Latin America for sure. So that is adoption, right? That's what happens when you adopt the perfect FU money, right? Like you suddenly become the king.
I want to get into the Bitcoin office now. It was a pretty big announcement. They just announced it like last week, I think. Can you tell us about what the Bitcoin office is going to be doing for El Salvador?
So because of all of the achievements with Bitcoin in El Salvador and what President Bukele has done here, of course, he's the most popular guy in the world. It's like, working for Mick Jagger. Everybody wants Mick Jagger at their birthday party. Everybody wants to hang out with him. So it was just like the sheer quantity of people wanting to meet him, wanting to come to El Salvador, wanting to invest in El Salvador. This is in the Bitcoin space. We just needed a way to funnel all the people, because at the moment there was no one destination that they were going to. There were a bunch of different ministries and contacts, and people were trying to find a way to access the economy here, the Bitcoin economy, and the new financial system that is being built upon it. So the Bitcoin office was created by the president under his office, within his office, in order to basically make it easier for real Bitcoin investors to come here and to participate in this economy, because there's an office to come to where we can give them the information and help them. We will also coordinate and work with these Bitcoin embassies. We call them Bitcoin embassies, but they're chamber of commerces in places like Lugano, and we hope to open some more. And these will facilitate exchange in Bitcoin policy ideas, education projects, and things like that, as other nations, cities, maybe states, and a place like the United States might adopt Bitcoin as a de facto legal tender in their jurisdiction. So this is the office by which the president can communicate with individuals, with investors, with other nations and regions about Bitcoin policy.
Okay. So it's not like helping people like move there. It's more like to help them get information on opening businesses and stuff like that then.
Yeah, for Bitcoiners coming here, like this is their first port of call. It is also to help, the president who, we in Bitcoin, we only think of him related to Bitcoin, right? But there is like pensions, there's a healthcare system, there's an education system, there's all sorts of other policy that he has to run. So we also, give him reports. We tell him what's happening in Bitcoin, any developments, and because of course, there is no FOMC sort of body that meets about Bitcoin. It's just, there are developments and consensus models that are, everybody's opinion matters. So we're just filtering for him the most important information. Of course, this is also part of that achievement, right? And the adoption that we were just discussing in terms of Bitcoin and El Salvador. President Bukele is the first mover, making El Salvador the first mover. He is the leader of the hyper-Bitcoinization. So other nations, regions, jurisdictions will follow. And we have the template. President Bukele has the template. He made a very simple law of the Bitcoin legal tender. He didn't explain Bitcoin like all these states and regions in the US try to like define it, and it ends up being this gobbledygook of shitcoining. It's Bitcoin, Bitcoin's legal tender, and it's very clear. That's your first step. Your next step is a Bitcoin office, Bitcoin embassies, securities laws. Like these are the steps. This is the template. When President Bukele first announced the volcano bond last year, for example, in November, that Bitcoin week of 2021 in El Salvador, he mentioned the Alexandria model, like that El Salvador would be a template, right? That they would be somebody to be copied. and throughout history for the next decades and hundreds of years to come. And we're providing the template. We're going to make it easy for other nations to follow, or jurisdictions. So that's why he's called in 2022 CoinDesk Best of Bitcoin. He's called the founding father of hyper Bitcoinization.
I'm glad you brought up the securities law, because that's my next question. What can you tell us about the new securities law? I believe it's called the Digital Asset Issuance Law.
Well, to put it simply, Bitcoin is money. Everything else is a security. Gary Gensler himself has said that for the United States, in terms of what he says, Bitcoin is obviously, he calls it a commodity. Of course, the United States has a reserve currency of the world. They're not going to call Bitcoin money yet, but he calls everything else that he's ever seen, that he seems to think that they're securities. They're choosing a, legislating through enforcement rather than just like codifying it right into clear guidelines for everybody to understand. So what El Salvador has done, what President Bukele has done, is just as part of this first mover leader of the world in hyper Bitcoinization, we're setting the template. So he is just saying, like, clearly, so people and companies and individuals who want to move here, set up shop here, these are the guidelines. These are the rules. These are the laws. This is what we are here. We're a Bitcoin country. And if you want to come with your securities, you have to register as such. You have to give all the disclosures of who's getting paid what, like who's earning these tokens. What are those tokens supposed to do? So we're the first mover with the best ideas, and we just keep winning.
What about stable coins like Tether? Are they considered securities under the securities law also?
No, the securities law does, mention that stablecoins exist, but stablecoins will have, separate legislation. They're not Bitcoin and they're not securities.
Yeah, they'll be treated like Forex or something, right?
Yeah, the United States has also indicated similar. In terms of that, the stablecoins are a different thing. They're one-to-one backed stablecoins, like one US tether equals $1 US in treasuries, right? So that's those sort of things. Yes, they'll have their own separate legislation here, hopefully soon in the future.
Okay. What about the volcano bond? We've heard a lot about it in the news over the last year. I think with the new securities law, it kind of paves the way for the volcano bond to move forward. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, the volcano bond is 2023. So it's going to make the top 10 list. It's going to be number one of the greatest achievement of 2023 for Bitcoin. It'll go down in the history books, just like President Bukele will be in the history books in 500 years from now for being the first mover into Bitcoin, for being the founding father of hyper Bitcoinization. The same thing with 2022, where he did all the work. 2023 will be the proof of working in 2022, that we laid the groundwork for this. We we established that this is Bitcoin country. We kept stacking Bitcoin. We established a template and a foundation for the financial system that is going to come on top of Bitcoin layer one. That layer one money is here. We have established that is what we are. And now comes the next phase, the proof of laying that foundation. So upon that solid foundation, you're going to see the evidence of like that Renaissance 2.0 that I talk about. You're going to see 2023 is going to blow people's minds. It'll start with a volcano bond. And what I can tell you is that it's coming, despite what you might read in the fiat FUD press. I always tell people, don't trust the FUD, verify for yourself, right? Verify for yourself by coming to El Salvador and seeing what everybody who comes here sees. I don't think anybody will see anything different but the success that is here. And the volcano bond will be the verification that the FUD was wrong when that comes. And that will be, only the president knows the date. But I know that it will be a success because I'm a Bitcoiner. I'm a longtime Bitcoiner. I know and have spoken to many of the people who will be buying Bitcoin, the volcano bonds. So I know it's going to sell out. And I'm pretty convinced, and I have no inside information, by the way, on this, but I'm pretty convinced there will be issuance number 2 and 3 and 4 coming like soon after, because the demand will be so great, because the first one will be oversubscribed, and therefore it'll be just inevitable that there will be more demand for further issuances. That's what I hope will happen.
That sounds super exciting. You and your husband, Max, are both expats, Americans that are living in El Salvador. And recently I saw Max on an interview. He was comparing El Salvador kind of to like a land of opportunity and freedom, similar to how the United States was in its early days. Has this been your experience as well?
Yes, I always call this a Renaissance 2.0 and Enlightenment 2.0. And I think they go hand in hand, right? President Bukele obviously swept into power with an enormous popularity. His skills as a leader, not as a politician, as an orator, as a man with a vision, and a man who can deliver on that vision. That's what you need for a statesman, right? You have to be a leader. You have to have a vision, be able to deliver on that vision, and the vision you can deliver on it because you're a great orator and you don't waver from that vision, and you don't change your opinion based on polls or anything like that, like a politician would. So when he swept into power, and because the people saw that he was going to end the 40 years of the status quo, right? The same two parties sharing power for 40 years. And during that time, millions of Salvadorans, and this is a little country, right? With like 7 million people here, just under 7 million people, and like 3 million in America. Why are 3 million in America? Because there was no opportunity here and there was no hope, because they were trapped in this cycle of never changing. Now we have the Renaissance 2.0. I always say hashtag Bitcoin plus Bukele equals these boom times. And that's that Renaissance, which rebranded the country by a kind of Streisand effect, but a modern one, like the Bukele effect. Is like the media can't stop looking at him. And, he's charismatic. He's good looking. He's like, he's a leader, right? He has a vision and he's convinced and he's mesmerizing. So they can't stop looking at him. They can't stop talking about him. This is causing the network of people around the world, the hive of people around the world, eyes to keep on looking at El Salvador, and being looked at creates a feedback here too, because of course it inspires him to be an even greater leader. That's part of that Renaissance 2.0 of his economic liberty policy. But what you've also seen change is with the Enlightenment 2.0. And Enlightenment 2.0 is about those human rights. And I think that's what Max was talking about on the Tucker Carlson show in the United States, is that the human rights, the three most important ones, according to Frederick Bastiat, a French statesman, who wrote that brilliant pamphlet. Anybody could read it. It's a brilliant short essay about what the law should serve and the purpose of the law. And the law is to protect life, liberty, and property. Now, the United States, in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, we call it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is it's a long story about that. But here in El Salvador, what the president has done is, you had the first signs of this prosperity coming, the boom times, the Renaissance 2.0. You saw the capital coming, you saw the tourists coming, you saw the great rebrand and the transformation. But how to extend that to everybody in the economy, including those who were basically occupied by a foreign force, right? These were regions outside the law, the protection of the state. They were ruled by these gangs, which had been sent from Californian prisons to Soyapango, Ilopango, Apopa, these poor areas in El Salvador. And he brought them the Salvadoran state to protect them, their individual rights to life, liberty, and property. They, up to 30% of GDP here was being stolen by just the gangsters. The gangsters were stealing the bottom. The politicians for 40 years were stealing like all the government contracts. Like you see over and over, like these arrests or these court cases going on against previous presidents or leaders, like stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from this tiny economy. So you had plunder everywhere. You had plunder at the top. And as Bastiat would have said, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, it trickles down, right? You create a legal system and a moral system that justifies this and glorifies it. So you had that. That was like in these areas like Ilopango, Soyapango, and Apopa. They were occupied by these gangs who plundered, took their money, took half at least, took their life. That's why it was the highest homicide rate in the world in El Salvador up until like 2018, maybe 2019. And then they also stole their liberty, obviously, because these people were not free to really leave. They had to flee. That's why you saw the mass migration to the United States. At great cost, many people lost their lives trying to get to America, but you weren't free. If you lived in Soyapango, you weren't free in how you lived your life, because it was up to the gangs as to whether or not you were free to start a certain business or conduct business in the way you wanted or live your life in the way you wanted. So that's the Enlightenment 2.0, because they've been taken care of now. They are now within the law. Before, those regions were outside of the law. That's what, in the days of like when you were talking about the Enlightenment, when these ideas were being created, being outside the law meant you were not included in the protection of the law. So now they're protected, and now their wealth is not being stolen. And their wealth is also not being stolen through inflation, because they have the opportunity for sovereign individual money with Bitcoin that is unconfiscatable. And it is also unconfiscatable through inflation. Like there's nobody that's going to be printing it away and inflating their wealth. So this is Renaissance 2.0 and it's Enlightenment 2.0. And it's an exciting place to be, because it's only just getting started. These are the first days.
One of the things that really drove home like the impact that the crime had on the country for me was a couple of years back, the gangs were trying to get a law passed to make their extortion like legal.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. That's what Bastiat said in his essay, The Law. He said when plunder, when theft, when stealing becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over time, they create the legal system that justifies it and the moral code that glorifies it. So that's what they were, that makes perfect sense that they would try to change the law to legalize their plunder. Like that's what the United States has become as well. Like that's like Wall Street is the perfect example of that. They write the laws. Like in the United States, even there was a Princeton study, I think it was, maybe Cornell, one of the Ivy League sort of universities wrote this study, and they found out that the US citizen has zero impact on policy, zero. That all of it is written by the corporations. So they're the plunderers. They're the ones writing the legal code that justifies their crimes and their plunder, essentially, because they build moats that keep competition out. That's plunder, right? So it makes perfect sense that the gangs would have inevitably changed the laws. Yes.
At the conference, Paolo, the CTO of Bitfinex, went on stage and presented Bitfinex's Freedom Manifesto. Since we're talking about freedom and Bukele's leadership, trying to steer El Salvador towards freedom, what's your take on the Freedom Manifesto?
2022 was his year as well, right? And it makes sense that Bitfinex and Tether would find their way to El Salvador as well, because like attracts like greatness attracts greatness, and the brave attract the brave. This is the monetary revolution happening here, and this is the moment to, if you're a freedom lover, and like all the stuff that Paolo works on, whether with Keat, all the peer-to-peer technology, Bitcoin, like all of that stuff is the Enlightenment 2.0. That is, as Max said, it doesn't matter where you live or where you are. The American idea, the French revolutionary ideas, like these ideas of enlightenment are with you or they're not, right? So here in El Salvador is a perfect place for Paolo to have presented his Freedom Manifesto. And it makes sense that, he would start with Bitcoin and be not only delivering, like maintaining Bitcoin and helping with that and that ecosystem and that network, but also providing the freedom of speech that is really important to go with the free speech money. That is, FU money is free speech money. But how do you maintain this, this communication and this community, this global community of freedom lovers that are, have their individual sovereignty, but how do you make sure that it stays forever? Like, how do you create a space that is uncensorable? And all the stuff he's doing with Keat and Hole Punch, it feels like had you been there in like 2006, 7, 8, when Satoshi must have been like developing Bitcoin, and if you could have seen like what he was actually doing, or they or she were actually doing, building the algorithm and what was coming. Yeah, that feels like that what Paolo is building with his technologies as expressed in his Freedom Manifesto. He's telling you what's coming, like what's there in 2023, 2024, 25, 26, like what the roadmap ahead is. And, that's exactly what we have here. This is the path we're taking in El Salvador, down Enlightenment 2.0 and Renaissance 2.0. When I say Renaissance 2.0, I mean, in the first Renaissance in Florence, you had the most perfect money available at the time, which was the florin developed. And it made perfect sense now looking back on it that would attract like all the most commerce, the merchants that had the florin when they went to North Africa, to buy some spices or something, like the trader there would like accept the florin over the guy with the other one that he wasn't sure whether or not that was a real, like, worth its weight in gold. The florin was trusted. So it naturally became a cycle where you attracted wealth, that attracted excellence. It brought in the artists, the architects, the accountants, the discoverers, the explorers, and that inevitably led to the likes of Medici, who attracted the greatest artist of them all and all the great achievements, right? So I think in El Salvador, where we are, is at that point where we already have the perfect money. So the age of Bitcoin was from, October 31st, 2008 until, say, June 2021, when we entered the equivalent to what happened with the age of Lorenzo the Magnificent, right? We're in the age of Bukele, right? It's like a second layer on top of Bitcoin. We had the age of Bitcoin, and now we have the age of Bukele. They're like linked together. You didn't have Medici without the florin. Like they go together. But the same thing here, Bitcoin plus Bukele equals the boom times. And yeah, so I think it was a perfect place for Paolo to announce his Freedom Manifesto.
Thank you. I wanted to take it back to something you said earlier in the interview. You were talking about Max and Tour de Meester kind of predicting which nation state would be the first to adopt Bitcoin. I think a lot of people were kind of caught off guard by El Salvador being the first nation to adopt Bitcoin. But we saw the Central African Republic also adopt Bitcoin after El Salvador did, following Bukele's lead. That kind of caught me a little off guard as well, because I figured it would probably be another Latin American country that was the second one as well. What's your prediction for the third country to adopt Bitcoin?
Well, CAR is kind of like a cautionary tale too, right? Obviously, President Taldera, if you read his the works he actually quotes and stuff like that, he's a mathematician. He's very smart, and I think he really understands Bitcoin. But the problem that happened for them is, there are all sorts of people in a government, right? And they are, somebody with a shitcoin flies in their private jet from their plunder. Many people argue that they plunder the willing, right? People who want to buy their bags. And so it's all like free market plunder, whatever. These people, however, use that, like the people who willingly give these certain billionaire, shitcoiners, who willingly give them the money and empower those people, enrich them to a degree where they can go and intervene in this process of Enlightenment 2.0 and Renaissance 2.0 in a poor nation like CAR. And CAR is a really poor nation. Like El Salvador is not like a really poor nation like that. They had a high crime problem, but CAR is like in the bottom 5 of, certainly the bottom 10 of the poorest nations on earth. And so they were immediately approached, and they were immediately approached by the billionaire shitcoiners in their private jets, and then got Sango coin and who knows what's going on there now. I think they were abandoned. Basically, they went to Sango coin, and apparently Sango coin was one developer in Poland somewhere, that they never created this. So it's been abandoned. The whole project, whoever got the headlines for their token and maybe pumped their coins, they're gone. So they want to go back to Bitcoin. But this is the process. So you're going to need a place to actually do what El Salvador has done. Is you need a leader who understands Bitcoin and who is a statesman like President Bukele. He's convincing. He's he's a persuader. People follow him. Like if he says Bitcoin only, then it's Bitcoin only, because he's convincing. And then now they're Bitcoin only in this country, and people are seeing as the whole shitcoin world falls apart, they understand that. But why the president was immediately understood that, why he was brilliant and got that before. He didn't need to see a disaster to understand why. But so you're going to need a place like, I think the same thing still holds true as what Max and Tour de Meester had argued, is that it would have to be, a smaller nation with a economic liberty as kind of their policy, whether it's just like, say part of the entire culture or somebody from the leader doing this. And it does make sense now, because of El Salvador's experience, that it will be it should probably end up being a nation which they don't already have their own currency, because having a proof of stake creates cantillionaire class in your economy, right? And cantillionaires will fight to the death to keep their privilege, to maintain that privilege. So if you can print up all the pesos or reals or anything, whatever your dirham that you call your money, you have an ingrained, cantillionaire class who will like do everything to keep that privilege. El Salvador already was on the US dollar standard. They couldn't print their own money. They could only watch in despair as the US printed trillions over the last few years. But there are other economies, especially in Latin America, where they are on a dollar standard already. So it's not that much of a leap to go from there to Bitcoin, especially since we only have 3 layer 1 monies in the world. That's Bitcoin, gold, and the US dollar. So if you're already on a solid layer 1 money, then it's not that much more to swap between those 3. Do you know what I mean? Compared to, say, go from a peso where you have your own cantillionaire class and then have to, re-engineer the whole economy that might have already been used to really high inflation, and to convert to a hard money is going to be it's a big leap. So if you're already on a US dollar standard, I would think it seems natural that your population is already on board in a way. They're already like thinking like that. They're already there's nobody in their own government in control of the money supply anyway. So I think that makes sense to me.
You've been super generous with your time. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think our viewers should know?
You didn't ask me who has the best coffee in the world? Which nation?
All right. Well, I'm a little biased being here in Colombia.
I know. I know that's why, because you're in Colombia. That's why you didn't ask me.
Yeah.
I do that to taunt I knew the Colombians would come at me. I did tweet that El Salvador has the best coffee in the world. Fight me. And you know who showed up? Were a whole bunch of Colombians.
Yeah. No, the coffee is good though. I tried the coffee in a taco, the bourbon coffee, and it was excellent. So I will say that it is very, very good. Well, thank you so much for doing the interview, Stacy. How can people follow you? How can they keep tabs on what you're doing?
Well, for my personal stuff, you can go to Twitter /Stacy Herbert, STACYHERBERT, or you can go for Bitcoin Office. We have Bitcoin Office SV. That's the country code for El Salvador, SV. For our content, and we're relaunching here in El Salvador with our Orange Pill podcast in January. So you can go to our Telegram group, t.me/Orange Pill, or follow us on Twitter at also Orange Pill Pod, POD.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking to you about Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador.